I would argue that, generally speaking, the most powerful thing you can do with spells in D&D is control the battlefield. But the problem is, I really like being able to do lots of damage with my characters. Well, what if we could do both? Build a character who only ever used cantrips to deal damage, but really solid damage, leaving both their concentration and their spell slots free so they can control or even teleport or support with their spells to their heart's content. That is what we're going to try and build in today's video. Welcome to D4. Hey everybody. So here at D4, every week, I like to take a deep dive into one specific character build for my favorite role-playing games. I like to crunch numbers about them, I like to theorycraft about them, not so that I can tell you the definitive right way to play this character, but to explore one potential way to build something in the hopes of creating a character that's both really powerful, but also really fun to play. So if you also really enjoy character creation for your favorite role-playing games, or if you just like theorycrafting, or if you're looking for tips or ideas on how to build something that you're thinking about playing, then welcome home. This is where you belong, and I'm so glad you're here. So thanks for watching. My name is Colby. So of all the changes that we saw with wizard subclasses in the 2024 Player's Handbook, there was one that caught my eye above all others. Any guesses as to what it was? If you said the Evocation Wizard's Potent Cantrip feature, then you know me well, my friend. In 2014, this feature told us that if an enemy made their save against one of our damage-dealing cantrips, they still took half damage. This was a pretty cool little feature. I tried to make use of it a couple of times, like with the Nuclear Wizard or the Cantrip Blaster, especially. With the 2024 Player's Handbook, though, this feature actually got two pretty significant changes. Buffs, really. First of all, it was moved from a 6th level feature to a 3rd level feature, swapping places with sculpt spells, which I'm totally cool with since we don't really care that much about sculpt spells until we get Fireball at Wizard 5 anyways, right? But the one that really made me raise my eyebrows was that Potent Cantrip was also changed to deal half damage when the enemy succeeds on their save, or if you miss with an attack roll on a damage-dealing cantrip. Whoa. I don't think there's any other ability in game that lets you deal half damage on a missed attack. The new Gray's Weapon Mastery does a little damage on a miss, but half damage? I mean, you know where my mind went immediately, right? Eldritch Blast, the hardest hitting cantrip in the game, because the beauty of the Potent Cantrip feature is that it doesn't specify that the cantrip has to be a wizard one. And with the feature being changed to a 3rd level feature, suddenly trying to make the hardest hitting Cantrip Blaster possible felt like it got a potential big bump. So that is what I want to do today. Figure out just how strong a damage dealer I can make if I build a character that only relies on cantrips for damage. And yes, I even mean avoiding concentrating on spells that might increase our cantrip damage. Why? Well, for the same reasons that I laid out when I made that first Cantrip Blaster build, I suppose. Many people argue, and quite astutely, I think, that the most powerful thing you can do with your spells is usually not, in fact, something to increase our damage, but instead to do things that lock down and disable enemies on the battlefield. Throwing out an extra bit of damage you're doing on your turn is great, and it feels powerful, but preventing half of the enemies in the fight from doing anything, letting you and your allies easily pick apart the others, then move on to those who are controlled, can often let your team just coast to an easy win that a little bit more damage just wouldn't really achieve. So I love the idea of building a character who can kind of have their cake and eat it too. Use cantrips and only cantrips for damage so they can save their concentration and all of those delicious spell slots for the really good stuff, right? Sleep, web, suggestion, Tasha's hideous laughter, fear, hypnotic pattern, slow, wall of stone, wall of force, etc., etc. Or, I mean, sure, for Fireball, and Synaptic Static, and Steel Wind Strike, and Chain Lightning, and Disintegrate too, I guess. And utility, and support spells if need be. If we could get our cantrip damage to be solid, without concentration, maybe at least up to like baseline, right? Or near it, just with cantrips, that would be amazing. So those are the restrictions that I'm putting on myself for this build. Let's see if it's better than ever now, and if so, just how much better it is than before. I proudly present D&D episode number 191, the Cantrip Blaster 2.0, the Triple Mage, the Arcane Blaster, the Trigun Magus. So anyways, I started blasting. Yes, we can trip. Blast Presso. Some really good ones from the Discord with this build this week. Thanks everybody for all of your suggestions. I think I'm going to keep it a little boring and go with the ultimate Eldritch Blaster. Sorry, lame, I know, but descriptive. Huge thanks to my good friend Randall Hampton for the fantastic artwork that he put together for this build. He does this every week. He's such a great artist. If you'd be interested in following him on social media to check out the other stuff that he's done, or potentially try and commission him to create some art for your character or even your entire party, I'll put links in the video description on how to do so. And first, a word from our sponsor. Ow, my hand. What's wrong, dude? Getting hand cramps from having to write down all of these session notes. What was the name of the guy that gave us the quest for that golden ball thingy? It's called the Orb of Divine Radiance, and it was from Overlord Thoraxidil. Overlord... How do you spell Thoraxidil? It's spelled like it sounds. Just spell it like it sounds to you. Fine. And this orb was in the White Spire Mountains? No, dude, the Ridgeback Mountains. How many times do I have to tell you? You know what would be awesome? If you could remember stuff that I've already told you like 5,000 times? No, dude. If we had some sort of system that could just automatically keep track of all of this stuff for us. That sounds about as far-fetched as the existence of a guy named Overlord Thoraxidil. No, dude, what if we could use, like, computers to manage all of this stuff for us? What, like the Apple II that we play Oregon Trail on at school? Exactly, but it could have, like, detailed maps that you could upload with, like, all of the names of important places if you clicked on them. Clicked? What are we clicking on or with? With a mouse. Mouse. Why is there a mouse on our Forget it. You click on the place and it would tell you all of the important information about that place. And you could keep track of everything about this world that you built. And all the important characters and history and factions and lore. And then somehow I could, like, access all of that information simultaneously on my own computer. Where are we going to store all of these computers? Where I could also keep, like, my own character sheet and all of my session notes. Where everything would be organized and easily accessible. I don't know. Sounds like science fiction, dude. Remember, we're playing a fantasy game. No way, dude. I'm totally gonna invent that system. And it's gonna change the world. And fortunately for us, that guy from the 80s with the perfectly feathered hair went on to realize his dream. And he called it World Anvil. So go check them out at this link here, which I'll also include in the video description, to make your life and everyone else's life at your table so much easier and better organized. Sign up for a free account to test it out. If you decide to upgrade to an annual subscription, use the code D4 at checkout to save an astronomical 51% off of your subscription fee. Thanks, World Anvil and feather-haired dude from the 80s. You guys rock. Okay, let's get back to the build. At level 1, for our starting class. Right, so even though the inspiration for this build was sort of that Cantrip Blaster 1.0, right? This is sort of a Cantrip Blaster 2.0. It actually doesn't have a lot in common with that original Cantrip Blaster, other than some wizard levels and the concept. This one is going to start Sorcerer, and is going to be mostly Sorcerer throughout. But we are going to do some heavy dipping into the two other, like, arcane mage classes. And that might be the first time I will ever have done that. I've done Sorcerer Wizard once or twice, and plenty of Sorcerer Warlocks, right? Sorlocks, but never a Wiz-Sorlock before. Pretty sure. Anyways, why start Sorcerer? I thought we were going for Potent Cantrip. We are. But if we want to get the hardest hitting cantrip out there, that means Eldritch Blast, of course. And if we're Eldritch Blasting, then we want to be Charisma based. And if we want to be Charisma based, but still enjoy high level spell slots and the better spell list, plus other nice benefits, then I think we go mostly Sorcerer. And if we're going Sorcerer, we're starting Sorcerer for that fantastic Constitution saving throw proficiency to benefit our concentration checks, right? Right. As for our species, as crazy as this sounds, I'm honestly just going to say pick your favorite here. What? Preposterous. I know. But truly, there's not much we can do to have a significant impact on our sustained damage. I've talked about this, right, with 2024. Halfling would give us a little bump thanks to Lucky, but it's so very little. Just like them. So cute. But luck is a great feature for more than just damage. So yeah, play a hobbit or go Goliath for some fun once in a while, damage or utility, or human for an extra origin feat, or dwarf for a few more hit points, or I mean heck, sure, tiefling or gnome, because you really want to play a tiefling or a gnome. The build is going to be great regardless. As for a background, as always, I'm going to say go for a custom or old background that you can customize, right? If you can, but if not, I'm probably going to take Merchant or Entertainer, I think, since those give us the right ability score increases and one of the feats that I'd probably prefer on this build, which would be either Lucky or Musician. With Lucky, I just love the idea of giving myself advantage or an enemy disadvantage when need be, but Musician is also just really solid to give your entire party heroic inspiration after every rest, right? Feel free to grab something else like Alert or Tough, etc. if you'd rather. For our starting ability scores, I'm going to assume the point buy method as always and say let's start with a 15 Charisma, take a +2 there, a 13 Constitution and a +1, a 14 Dexterity, and a 13 Intelligence. Or if you took Entertainer, you'd be bumping Dexterity instead of Con, right? You get it. In the end, we want a 17 Charisma, 14 Constitution, 14 Dexterity, and a 13 Intelligence. We need that Intelligence for multiclassing into Wizard later. As for our starting equipment, we're not using weapons and we don't have armor proficiency, nor do we have the ability scores to multiclass into Paladin or Ranger to get them and thereby not delay our spell slot progression, right? I guess we could take a fighter dip, but nah. I'm going to live the life of this triple mage like it was meant to be lived. Wearing robes and wielding a staff. We're going old school, baby. Living on the edge. I mean, I guess, sure, once you multiclass into Warlock later, you would get light armor proficiency, and you could then wear that, but until you get magical studded leather, you're better off with mage armor. So anyways, as a Sorcerer 1, first up, we get my favorite new Sorcerer ability, Innate Sorcery, which says that twice per day, we can use a bonus action to buff ourselves for 1 minute, so that our Sorcerer spelled DC increases by 1, and we have advantage on all of our Sorcerer spell attack rolls. Gosh, dang it. I wish we had a way to make Eldritch Blast a Sorcerer spell, but alas, that's okay. I appreciate the bump regardless, and it will especially come in handy when later we're concentrating on a nice Sorcerer-based control spell, right? As for what spells to take, at level 1 here, I want more than I can have, but consider Poison Spray or Sorcerous Burst for some ranged damage, True Strike for some melee damage. I'd say Mage Armor and Shield on this build for defensive purposes, and Sleep for some solid control right at level 1. We've got a pretty nice little tool belt of spells to start out with. You know what's also pretty nice? My channel members. They're so awesome. You guys, thank you so much for all that you do for me and for this channel. I really appreciate your support. If you're not a member, I'd really appreciate it if you'd consider joining. There's a little button down there. It says join. You click on it and it will tell you the benefits that you can get by being a member, including access to the library of write-ups that I create for each of these builds to help you recreate them yourself a little more easily, access to the monthly Discord server filled with lots of wonderful people and lively, engaging conversations, and even access to the live monthly Q&A hangout sessions that we do, which we're going to be doing this afternoon, actually, for the month of October. Super excited. Favorite day of the month. But hey, if you can't or aren't interested in being a member, that's okay. I'm really grateful that you're just here and watching and liking and subscribing, hopefully, and clicking the notifications bell, telling your friends about the channel and the videos. All of these things also really help support me, so thanks. Okay, at level 2, we need to multiclass into Warlock, mostly for Eldritch Blast purposes. So why is your character multiclassing? Now, maybe you don't need a reason at your table. Maybe your DM is okay with you saying, hey, I'm just building a custom class here. It's called the Archmage or whatever. That just so happens to take levels in Sorcerer, Warlock, and Wizard. But your DM might be the kind who demands a character or story reason for multiclassing. So you tell me. Perhaps the being in your ancestry that gave you your innate sorceress spark is an otherworldly being themselves, and have now reached out to you, their progeny, to grant you further power if you will pledge yourself to their cause. Regardless, at Warlock 1, we get invocations instead of our subclass now, and I love getting them right away. Now, we only get one, and a lot of the good ones still have a prerequisite of Warlock 2 or greater, but this still leaves us with Eldritch Mind, among others, and that's the one that I would go for here so that we can have advantage on our concentration checks. And I gotta say, having both Constitution saving throw proficiency and concentration check advantage right at level 2 feels incredibly awesome. As for the Warlock spells that we would get here, I would focus, of course, on things that sorcerers don't normally get access to. Armor of Agathis for some nice defense and return damage on a hit. Tasha's Hideous Laughter for some really solid single target control. But then, yes, of course, Eldritch Blast. And in case you didn't know, the thing that makes this spell so good is that when it scales at levels 5, 11, and 17, like all cantrips do, it doesn't just do more damage on a hit, but instead it fires more beams. And when you're adding damage to each of them, like we would be doing at level 3 when we'd be a Warlock 2, because we get more invocations at this level, which means that we could take Agonizing Blast, which adds our Charisma modifier to the damage we do with, for us, Eldritch Blast, then yes, it becomes the hardest hitting cantrip in the game. Ooh, that was a long parenthetical phrase there. Because it's going to add that charisma bonus multiple times to multiple beams in a couple of levels anyways. And that is fantastic. As for the other invocation, I would probably take at Warlock 2. I mean, I think it's gotta be Repelling Blast, right? If we're relying so heavily on Eldritch Blast, so that we can push enemies 10 feet away from us with each beam that we hit them with, potentially different enemies, right? As long as they're larger, smaller, at least. There are just so many times when this will be a great idea. Whether to just get enemies away from you or your friends so that you can move without taking opportunity attacks, or to push them into a spell's area of effect, or position them before you cast an area of effect spell, or to push them off a cliff, etc., etc. Feel free to take, Eldritch Spear for greater distance on your spell, or Armor of Shadows for free mage armor is really nice if we're not going to get anything better than light armor proficiency. A Pact of the Tome for some nice extra ritual spells, etc. But yeah, I think I'm going with Repelling Blast. Warlocks also get the new Magical Cunning feature here as well, which is great, letting us recover half of our Warlock spell slots, so 1, with a rite that we perform that only takes 1 minute. Nice if we don't have time for a short rest, though we can only do this once per day. Now, at level 4, I'd love to go for 3 levels of Wizard now, just to test out the math on Potent Cantrip by our first damage report, but I know that it's not going to be very good yet. Taking 3 levels of Wizard now just seems like kind of a terrible idea for anything other than, in the name of science. We are a charisma-based caster, and even though our Eldritch Blast damage is going to scale with level regardless of class, we are going to want to get to higher level Warlock or Sorcerer spells so that we can be concentrating on something useful and powerful rather than going 3 levels into Wizard with our crappy intelligence score this early in our career, right? I guess we could just be concentrating on sleep and Tasha's Hideous Laughter or something and then take our Wizard levels, but I think in-game it just makes so much more sense to delay those Wizard levels for a bit. Plus, if we go back to Sorcerer, we can get Metamagic and Sorcery points, which will actually do a lot more to increase our damage, though limited in use, than Potent Cantrip from Wizard would right now. So yeah, let's do that. Meaning that we would be a Sorcerer 2 here, giving us a Font of Magic, our sorcery points, which we get 1 of per Sorcerer level, which we can use to turn into spell slots, or vice versa, or use them for Metamagic, which we get at Sorcerer level 2 now, thank goodness. And the 2 options that I would pick for Metamagic, I think, would be, as usual, Quicken Spell, and then probably Subtle Spell. Though this is a tough choice, honestly. I love Subtle Spell for casting without any components now. A great way to start off combat before even rolling initiative a lot of times, like we discussed in that Critty Bang Bang build from a couple of weeks ago. But Heightened Spell is strong to give an enemy disadvantage on a powerful spell you cast. Careful Spell is great to let your allies avoid the damaging effects from your area of effect spells. So you're gonna have to make a difficult choice there. But as far as Quicken Spell goes, yeah, it just does really great things for our damage especially. It costs 2 sorcery points, so it's not cheap, but it lets you cast a spell with your bonus action that usually costs an action, and while it doesn't allow you to circumnavigate the no more than 1 spell slotted spell per turn prohibition, it would let you, say, cast Eldritch Blast and a great control spell on the same turn. Or, heck, cast Eldritch Blast twice if you were just looking for damage. And me being me, I'm always looking for damage, so sure, why not? At level 5, we would be a Sorcerer 3, and that means we get our Sorcerer subclass now, and I am 100% taking Clockwork Sorcery here, even though it got a pretty significant nerf. There's one main mechanical, reason that I'm doing this, but we won't get there for many, many levels. So if you'd really rather take a different subclass, go for it. But I am following the path of Mechanus myself. Mechanus? Mechanus. It's Mechanus, right? Anyways, this means that we get the Restore Balance feature here, which says that charisma modifier times per day when a creature we can see within 60 feet is about to roll a d20 with advantage or disadvantage, we can use our reaction to prevent that advantage or disadvantage. Nice little defensive feature. Well, it could be offensive too, I guess. Nice little feature. But then we get a second level sorcerer spells. And the main draw of the Clockwork Sorcery subclass used to be their Clockwork Spells feature. And actually, it still is, though it has been pretty greatly nerfed. It used to really open up our potential spell list, right? Letting us draw on spells from other classes. Now it just gives us additional spells that we always have prepared. But hey, they're really good spells. Arguably the best, unique spell list of any sorcerer subclass. At this level, we get Aid, Alarm, Lesser Restoration, and Protection from Good and Evil for free. Really nice choices there. And then in addition to those, I would consider Cloud of Daggers to give you and your allies lots of ways to add damage if you can move enemies around the battlefield, like we can if we took Repelling Blast, right? Though, again, I'm not going to assume that we're using concentration for damage on this build. But Hold Person is great for solid humanoid control, Misty Step for teleporting, obviously, Mirror Image for defense. The one I think I would prioritize over all others, though, here would be Web. It covers a nice 20 by 20 area in sticky webs, right, that can potentially snare and restrain multiple enemies. I think it's what I would mostly be concentrating on here for the next several levels, especially if I took Repelling Blast, so that I could not just lock down enemies that I cast the spell on, but so that I could be pushing enemies into it, potentially every round, to continue to keep them stuck. Also, at character level 5 here, don't forget Eldritch Blast now fires 2 beams, so we could potentially be pushing a couple of enemies every round into Web. That's awesome. Okay, at level 6, we would be a Sorcerer 4, and that means we get our first general feat, and I think we should take Spell Sniper. We want something to bump our charisma by 1, putting it at 18, right? And since we don't need Warcaster, thanks to the Eldritch Mind invocation, yeah, let's go Spell Sniper. It lets us ignore 1/2 and 3/4 cover on our Eldritch Blasts, really great, or any of our attack spells, right? Increases the range of our spells by 60 feet, wonderful, and prevents disadvantage on our ranged spell attacks when we are within 5 feet of an enemy. Super nice now to be able to just put our hand to their chest and blast them 10 or 20 feet away from us, and then move without taking an opportunity attack and not having disadvantage on those attacks, right? If you'd rather go Fey Touched or Ritual Caster or Telekinetic or something else, sure, knock yourself out. Okay, at level 6, it is time for our first damage report. So, here's what combat would potentially look like for us. I think before combat started, if I could, I would try to subtly cast Web on top of the most important enemy or enemies. This would initiate combat, of course, but if for whatever reason you can't get Web off before combat starts, despite having Subtle Spell, then on round 1 you could just quicken Web and then use your action to cast Eldritch Blast. When I crunch numbers, I'm just going to assume that we've gotten Web or whatever else we want to concentrate on off before combat begins, because I always like to assume best case scenario. Anyways, on rounds 2 through 4, remember from now on I do an average of damage over a 4-round combat encounter. I'm going to do what I assumed we did in round 1, which is quicken Eldritch Blast and cast it with our bonus action, and then use our action to Eldritch Blast again. Wait, you don't have the sorcery points for that? You're right. We've only got 4 right now, and quicken spell takes 2. But remember, if we really wanted to, we could cannibalize our spell slots to get more sorcery points, and doing so doesn't take a bonus action anymore. Thank goodness we've got some Warlock spell slots that reset on a short rest that can potentially feed those sorcery points, right? Now, should you do this? I mean, I can't know that. Only you can. How important is this fight? How many fights do you anticipate having before you can get a rest? All I can do is explore what we could do if we really wanted, if we had all our resources, at least for one combat encounter a day. So that's what I'm doing. And that's kind of what I've always done. And let me maybe just add this here. A couple of weeks ago, I put a poll out on Twitter and on my channel asking people how many combat encounters they had at their table on average between long rests. Of the thousands of respondents, the overwhelming majority said fewer than 4 combat encounters per day. In fact, more people said they had 0 to 1 fights a day than those who said they had 4 or more. So, I mean, sure, I could probably do an entire video on what this might mean for game balance and encounter balance and short rest versus long rest characters and marshals versus casters and what Wizards of the Coast supposedly designs the game for versus what most people who play it actually do. And while sure, plenty of comments on those polls talked about how they had only like 1 to 3 combat encounters in a day usually, but if they were in a dungeon crawl, it was different and they had more, etc., etc. But I think in the end, when I see this, when I see these poll results, it gives me a little comfort knowing that maybe building sustained damage dealing characters who really might only be able to do like this much damage for 1 or 2 combat encounters per day is still pretty likely to feel largely sustainable for most of us most of the time, especially since I know that you all are smart enough to go, okay, at my table, sometimes I might have to lower my expectations for what this build can do over an entire day's worth of encounters, but it's good to know what it would be capable of in a pinch if I needed to use up most of or my best resources, right? Anyways, tangent over. If we were quickening Eldritch Blast and then firing it again with our action, it would mean 4 Eldritch Blasts every round, with each one doing 1d10 plus 4 damage, and ideally pushing them into like your web spell to stick them in place, or another great battlefield hazard. Now, do I assume the enemy is restrained by web, and thus we have advantage on our blasts? I can't really assume that's the case every single attack, right? If we're going to be trying to push them into web sometimes, meaning they're not currently restrained. So, let's say for fun that half of the time we're attacking an enemy who's restrained and giving us advantage. Fair? Under those assumptions then, against an enemy with a 10 armor class, we would on average here do 38 damage per round, and against a 15 AC it would be 31 DPR. And compared to other 2024 sustained damage dealers that I've built to date, that's just keeping pace with the I can do this all day new baseline build. Nice. Now, sure, that build could, well, truly do that all day, and we could really only do this for 2 combat encounters max before burning through all of our resources. But still, it's good to know that we could do this kind of damage and throw down some fairly serious control in combat too. I like it. Let's see what happens when we add Potent Cantrip. Because yes, at level 7, I think now is about the right time to go for some wizard levels. Maybe take 1 more level in Sorcerer first so that you can get those fantastic 3rd level spells, right? But hey, I've got a damage report coming up at 9 and I want to see what Potent Cantrip does to our numbers. Now, the real question here is, why is your character taking wizard levels? I think it's not too far a stretch as a clockwork sorcerer, right? You're interested in order, in logic, in reasoning. Something about the nature of your own, like, inherent magic has compelled you to dive into a more serious academic and studious approach. You want to learn more about magic from the best minds, the best scholars, and the best books. So here we are. And this means that as a Wizard 1, we would get Ritual Adept, a fantastic feature that lets us cast any ritual spell that is in our spellbook. We don't even have to have it prepared. So start learning rituals. We also get Arcane Recovery right off the bat, which is great, letting us recover spent spell slots equal to half our wizard level rounded up and no higher than 5th level spell slots once per day after finishing a short rest. More spell slots are always good, especially for those of us who can turn them into sorcery points. Speaking of, thanks to multiclassing Sorcerer and Wizard together, we do have 3rd level spell slots now, in addition to our 2 1st level Warlock spell slots. So many spell slots. As for which Wizard spells to pick up here, grab stuff that isn't going to depend on a high intelligence to work well, and, focus on rituals too, of course. So things like Message, Find Familiar, Jump, Longstrider, Detect Magic. identify, comprehend languages. These can all be situationally useful, so take advantage. Turn yourself into a wonderful Swiss Army knife. At level 8, we would be a Wizard 2, and that means we get the new Scholar feature, which just says that we can get expertise in either Arcana, History, Investigation, Medicine, Nature, or Religion. I'd say pick your favorite. I'd probably go with Investigation, maybe Arcana personally, but that's all we get for this level. Is Wizard 2 now the worst Wizard level? I think it is, yes. But hey, they still have the best spell list, so take your lumps, I guess. Because at level 9, Wizard 3, we now get our subclass. And yes, of course, we are going with the blasteriest blaster, the Evoker. Let's read what Wizards of the Coast has to say about Evokers now. Create explosive elemental effects. Your studies focus on magic that creates powerful elemental effects, such as bitter cold, searing flame, rolling thunder, crackling lightning, and burning acid. Some evokers find employment in military forces, serving as artillery to blast armies from afar. Others use their power to protect others, while some seek their own gain. That felt a little weird. Others and others. Yes, indeed. Putting the artillery firepower into even a cantrip blaster like us. We get 2 features here as an evoker. Evocation Savant is normally cool, but not really for us. I love the way that they changed these like spell school savant features now. It just says that we get to learn 2 wizard evocation spells for free, and every time we gain access to a new level of spell slots in this class, we get another one for free. Such versatility and variety. But yeah, we don't really want to learn wizard evocation spells because those would be relying on our intelligence for the DC or for the chance to hit, right? And that's crappy for us. No, we are really here for potent cantrip, like I've said, which again now tells us that when we cast a cantrip, any cantrip, and miss with the attack roll or the target makes their save, they still take half damage. Now they suffer no other effect, but that is still really awesome, super unique. We also get second level wizard spells here, and again, let's focus on spells that don't need a good intelligence, so grab stuff like Augury, Cloud of Daggers, Invisibility, See Invisibility, Levitate, Mirror Image, Misty Step, Spider Climb. Yeah, there is a lot of potential overlap here with other classes' second level spells, and that's not a bad thing. Swap out what you've prepared as sorcerer spells when you can with, these ones from the wizard school that work fine with a low casting stat. Don't forget, we do get 4th level spell slots as a multi-classed wizard sorcerer here. And this is going to bring us to our next damage report. Okay. Since last check, the only real increase that we've seen to our damage is coming in the form of potent cantrip, meaning that if we hit, we would do about the same as we were doing back at level 6, right? But if we miss, we're going to still do half damage now. So what does that do to our average numbers? Well, against enemies with an AC of 10, it's going to do 42 damage per round on average. But against an AC of 16, it's going to be 38. And so this is super interesting, right? At least to nerds like me. Because at first glance, you might say 42 DPR, that's barely an increase since last time, right? And yeah, against those easy to hit targets, it's not much better than it was at level 6. But as the enemy AC goes up, the damage goes down by a lot less than it otherwise would, because even if we miss, we're still doing respectable damage, right? So yeah, it leads to a graph line that shows the damage dipping relatively little as the enemy AC increases, something that might make even an Elven Accuracy build a little bit jealous. At a 10 armor class, the damage is almost the same as it was at level 6, only 4 points higher, but at an enemy AC of 25, it's almost triple what it was at level 6. Higher than most 2024 builds I've done to date, even. And so, while sure, you might not be fighting a lot of enemies at level 9 with a 25 AC, I get totally geeked out by how consistent and reliable this damage is. And I love knowing that even if you're having an off night on your D20 rolls, this build would do respectable damage regardless. And that's so cool. To me, anyways. But of course, the best part is that you're concentrating here on non-damage spells, potentially. I mean, I guess, sure, you could concentrate on Cloud of Daggers, like I've said, and just push a bunch of enemies through the spell area on your turn. If you did that, your numbers would look a lot better here, right? But yeah, this is an all cantrip-only damage build, and it's still outpacing the all-day build and the Soul Knife from a few weeks ago. So awesome. Let's see if we can keep it up. At level 10, with Potent Cantrip Secure, I think we've got to go back to Sorcerer. I'd love to grab that feat at Wizard 4, but I just can't justify more Wizard levels at this point. Sorcerer gives us more sorcery points so that we can sustain this kind of damage better, more cool Sorcerer features, and of course, higher level spells. So as a Sorcerer 5, we get Sorceress Restoration, an awesome new feature that lets us recover up to half our spent sorcery points. It's equal to half our Sorcerer level, but rounded down. So 2 for now, after we take a short rest once per day, just like Arcane Recovery for Wizards. And, between Arcane Recovery and this, and the fact that we're getting our Warlock spell slots back on a short rest, I think it's really easy to assume that we're going to be able to quicken spell every turn if we want to, for most of us, during most of our average combat encounter days. And then, yes, we get 3rd level Sorcerer spells, and these are so good that you totally should have gotten to this point before taking Wizard levels. I just needed to see what the numbers looked like, right, at 9. Because Clockwork Sorcerers get Dispel Magic, awesome, and Protection from Energy, not bad, for free. But then, of course, there's Counterspell, Fireball, and the trifecta of control options, Hypnotic Pattern, Fear, and Slow. I'd almost assuredly be concentrating on one of those 3 spells at this point, depending on the situation, to either Charm, Incapacitate, and Immobilize in a 30-foot cube with Hypnotic Pattern, Frighten and Cause to Flee in a 30-foot cone with Fear, or give half speed, a -2 to AC and Dexterity saves, and only allow for an action or a bonus action, and prevent reactions, and maybe even cause spells to just not go off at all in the case of Slow. Which you can just straight up choose who to affect with for Slow, right? I really like Slow. I really like all of them. They are so good, and you're probably going to want all 3 so that you can use the right one for the right situation. At level 11, we would be a Sorcerer 6, and as a Clockwork Sorcerer, that means we get Bastion of Law, which lets us spend 1 to 5 sorcery points to create a magical shield around us or an ally that will absorb damage equal to a d8 times the number of sorcery points you spent before it expires. It's kind of a cool little protection or support feature. It is pretty expensive, sorcery points wise, so for emergency use only, I'd say. We do have 5th level spell slots now, thanks to multi-classing, and don't forget, at this level, most importantly, right, Eldritch Blast now fires 3 beams. At level 12, we would be a Sorcerer 7, and that means we get 4th level Sorcerer spells. Clockwork Sorcerers get Freedom of Movement and Summon Construct for free. Nice. And then you're probably going to want Dimension Door for a massive teleport for both you and a friend. Banishment for some grade A single target control, especially if the target is from another plane of existence, in which case it's not really control. It's kind of just removal, right? Greater invisibility is always nice if you want to attack and cast spells, but still stay invisible. Polymorph, of course, to turn a friend into a T-Rex or an enemy into a goldfish. Wall of Fire is nice for a little control plus damage. Have fun with it here. Pick your favorites. At level 13, we would be a Sorcerer 8. That means we get another feat so that we can finally bump our Charisma to 20 and cap it, right? And then don't forget a 6th level spell slot at this level as well, thanks to multiclassing. Okay, level 13, it is time for another damage report. Since last check, we have picked up an incredible amount of control, utility, burst, and even defense and support options. As for what we've done to increase our damage, a 3rd beam per casting of Eldritch Blast. Do I still assume that we've got advantage half the time on our attacks? If I'm not using web anymore, enemies aren't going to be restrained. That's true. But I would still have advantage against incapacitated enemies if they were under Hypnotic Pattern, or if I were attacking slowed enemies, they'd have a -2 to their AC. That the math looks a little different there than it would with advantage, but kind of depends on their starting armor class. I mean, heck, if you upcast Hold Person here as a control option, you'd be automatically critting, potentially. So I'm not making assumptions anymore on what you're concentrating on, but I am going to stick with my initial assumptions about advantage half of the time, even though results may vary at your table for each encounter. More likely than not, we're going to get some kind of benefit to our hit chance based on what spell we're concentrating on, based on who we're attacking. Okay, will the bumps that we got be enough to keep up damage-wise? Well, against enemies with a 10 AC, we would do 69 damage per round on average here. Nice. And against a 17 AC, it would be just a little bit less, 64. So yeah, it turns out that increasing your number of attacks by 50% leads to about a 50% damage increase. Who knew? Compared to other sustained damage builds that I've done to date, we're kind of in the same place as last time, beating out the all-day build and the soul knife, lagging behind the rest, except at very high enemy armor classes. Though that might look a little bit different once I finally finish adjusting all of my 2024 builds for that 4-turn combat encounter average, right? We might look even better by comparison. And again, we are really more of a controller than a damage dealer here. At least that's the most powerful thing our character is doing, I would say. So, hey, I'm feeling pretty awesome about where we're at. Okay, at level 14, we would be a Sorcerer 9. I had to at least get to Sorcerer 9 because that means 5th level Sorcerer spells, and that means we finally get the main thing that we even went Clockwork Sorcerer for in the first place. That's right, Wall of Force, one of the best control spells in the game, and the only ones who get it in the 2024 rules are Wizards, Bards if they use magical secrets for it, and Clockwork Sorcerers. If you can play with non-Player's Handbook subclasses, then Oath of Redemption Pallies can get it too, but not until Paladin level 17. Yeah, so the spell creates an invisible, invulnerable, outside of the Disintegrate spell anyways, force field with 10 by 10 panels that you can place anywhere or place as a 10-foot radius dome. Perfect for trapping enemies behind a wall they can't get out of, and they don't get to make any saving throws against it either. So good. And finally ours. Clockwork Souls also get Greater Restoration for free, a fantastic cure-all spell, and sure, you could also pick up Hold Monster for paralysis against anything, or Synaptic Static for a fireball-like damage explosion that targets intelligence, does psychic damage, and throws a nasty debuff that reduces attack rolls and ability and concentration checks by a d6. So delicious. At level 15, with those almighty 5th level spells in our pocket, though, I think I probably dip back to Warlock really quick. This is by no means mandatory. I've been wanting to do it for a long time, honestly, because I want a subclass, but also because doing so would give us 2 second-level Warlock spell slots that reset on a short rest, and that's more sorcery points back more consistently, if nothing else. So yes, we would be a Warlock 3, and we need to figure out what subclass to pick. Now, sure, we could go Genie to get a little more sustained damage if we wanted, plus some other nice benefits, but I don't know. Even though we're doing decent damage, that's not really what this character is meant to do, right? You're playing this character because you want to do tons of other cool and awesome stuff in and out of combat, and you just want your damage to be like good. It's okay if it's not great. So, I mean, take Genie if you want a damage bump, and the other, bottled respite type features, they're good. But I think if I want something that's even more useful and I think more fun, you gotta go Archfey, don't you? Because it is without a doubt the most fun, coolest subclass now. Post-2024. Not just because Fae and the Feywild are freaking awesome, but because you get to basically become Nightcrawler, thanks to their Steps of the Fae ability that they get here, which says that you can cast Misty Step charisma modifier times per day without spending a spell slot. 5 times a day, free Misty Step. That's kind of amazing. But then also, when you do this, you can make it a refreshing step, which gives you or an ally within 10 feet after you teleport a d10 of temporary hit points. Nice. Or make it a taunting step, which gives creatures within 5 feet of the spot you bamfed from have disadvantage on attacks they make against anyone but you until your next turn if they fail their wisdom save. Warlock tank? Another Warlock tank incoming? Maybe one day. For now, this might be a nice way to just keep an almost dead ally from going down, especially if you can bamf away and then maybe hide behind full cover or something, right? You've teleported 30 feet. Just be careful. Allies can be affected by this too, so don't accidentally debuff them as well. I mean, if you intentionally wanted to debuff them, I guess, sure, knock yourself out. Your Archfey patron has you feeling a little tricksy. This does bring up a good point though, actually, for me. How is this Clockwork Sorcerer, studious wizard, now making a pact with an Archfey? They almost seem like polar opposites, right? Order versus chaos. I don't know, but I'd guess that it was a pact you entered into against your will. Maybe you were tricked or trapped, or had to make a deal in order to save an ally or a loved one. You tell me how you would work it into your character's story. We do get 2nd level Warlock spells here, right, at this level, and I'm just going to say PYF, pick your favorites. There are lots of good ones. Archfey get Calm Emotions, Fairy Fire, Misty Step, of course, Phantasmal Force, and Sleep for free. A nice list. And I mean, you basically have access to just about every arcane 2nd level spell in the game now. So Pick whichever ones you want that you don't already have. At level 16, you could stick with Warlock to get even better spell slots back on a short rest for more castings, more sorcery points, not to mention a feat and some more great invocations. But I feel like we would be better served by higher level spells at this point. So let's go to Sorcerer 10. I mean, not to mention more sorcery points and even additional meta magic options, which is a huge draw for me right now. We get that at Sorcerer 10, right? Like I said, I probably am taking Subtle Spell back at Sorcerer 2, but there's a strong argument for taking, I think, Especially Careful Spell instead, even back then, since it got a nice buff for 2024. It still lets you spend a sorcery point when you cast an area of effect spell that forces creatures to make saving throws, and lets you choose charisma modifier number of creatures in the spell's area to automatically succeed. But now, if it's a spell that does damage, those allies who automatically succeed on their save take 0 damage on a successful save. So it's just like the Evocation Wizard's Sculpt spells, but on steroids, since it works for all spells and not just evocation spells. And if the primary goal with this character is to be controlling the battlefield, then it'd be really great to just let your friends ignore your fear or hypnotic pattern so that you can place it exactly where you want for maximum effect, right? To say nothing of just fireballing wherever you want. And yeah, this makes me even happier about Sculpt spells and potent cantrip swapping places for the Evocation Wizard, because on this build we can get Careful Spell meta magic and enjoy both. I still think I probably take Subtle Spell over this first, but it's not a no-brainer. Don't forget we do get a 7th level spell slot here as well thanks to multiclassing. At level 17, we would be a Sorcerer 11, and that means 6th level Sorcerer spells. I think we've got to take Mass Suggestion here, as I usually recommend when it's available. It's just such a potent way to end a fight almost before it begins, suggesting that enemies go home to save their village that's under attack, or that there's a treasure hoard awaiting them 20 miles away, or whatever might make sense for the particular enemies you're fighting. But of course, if you want more blasting capabilities, you could always grab Chain Lightning or Disintegrate instead. But most importantly for us at level 17, we get our final bump to Eldritch Blast, right? Now it fires 4 beams whenever we cast it. And so at level 17, it's time for our final damage report. Since last check, we have done amazing things to increase our control, utility, mobility, and awesomeness, but not a lot to increase our sustained damage, aside from adding a 4th beam to Eldritch Blast, which is admittedly a really big deal and should still give us a significant bump. So against enemies with a 10 armor class here, we would on average do 92 damage per round. We almost hit that century mark. And versus an 18 armor class, it would be 85 DPR on average. And compared to other 2024 sustained damage builds I've done to date, we've gained a little ground, actually, landing us kind of like smack dab in the middle of all builds, despite not having really done much to increase our damage other than just get to level 17. Nice thing about cantrips, I guess. So, okay, I've got some thoughts to discuss in the final thoughts. The tier score for this build, if you take the damage that they do against every armor class at each of the 4 damage reports that we calculate for and just average them all into one big number, we end up with a 52, which would put them, not surprisingly, near the bottom of damage dealers for 2024 builds, still above the all-day build and the Soul Knife, but keep in mind, the goal of those builds was for the one to do as much damage as possible without spending any resources or needing any setup, and for the other to be the best rogue possible, full of amazing utility without multiclassing too much and still at least keep up with that all-day build. Similarly, the goal of this build was to use spell-slotted spells for control and or utility and or AoE burst, you know, the things that you primarily want to be using spells for, and just do sustainable damage with cantrips. And the fact that we can do that and still out-damage those other 2 builds consistently says a lot about the power of this build. Now, to be fair, we are still spending resources in a way that may or may not be super sustainable compared to those other 2. But especially once you get into tier 2 play and beyond, I think this build is going to have the sorcery points to pull off the double Eldritch Blast tactic every turn at most tables for most adventuring days, right? For every combat encounter they face. I don't feel too bad about the sustainability. And yeah, don't forget, like I said, I'm currently reworking the numbers for all of those 2024 sustained damage builds so that the numbers reflect average damage over a 4-round combat encounter. And once that's done, we're going to look even better by comparison. But you know what might be the most surprising thing to me about this build? If you compare the numbers here to old 2014 rules builds, which is basically like middle of the pack for all 75 or so of them that I did, which is way more damage than any other mostly a controller build that I've done, with one exception. I mean, I'm talking things like the Battlesmith controller or the Song of Ice and Artifice or the Street Fighter. Those were all tier 5 builds, and I was just happy to get them to be like better than the worst. The one exception here might be the Cosmic controller. Man, that was a great build. It was a monk cleric. But also, to be fair, that build was requiring more setup, and their control wasn't as potentially potent as ours is here with this build. And I mean, compare this build to that original Cantrip Blaster. That was built for damage to multiple enemies and was a burst or Nova damage build, so it's not apples to apples. But that first Cantrip Blaster was doing a lot less single target damage than we are, and way less sustainably too. All of this leads me to the conclusion, I suppose, that the changes to Potent Cantrip are, well, really potent. 3 levels into Wizard is a fairly big stretch to get a feature like this, but honestly, I think it's probably worth it if you want to find a nice happy medium of solid damage, but still with great control, utility, and like AoE options, right? I mean, Pack Tactics put out a video a couple of years ago that talked about how much damage we got from enemies taking half damage on a save. Watch it here if you haven't. It was a really good video. Changing Potent Cantrip so that it causes enemies to take half damage on a missed attack cantrip as well just really does a lot of work. Doesn't really do much to raise the ceiling of what's possible for us damage-wise, but it definitely raises the floor of the minimum amount of damage we can do on a build. And that's a theme that I'm kind of seeing with a lot of things in the 2024 rules, actually. So yeah, I see Wizards of the Coast kind of trying to tighten up their math a little bit with stuff like this. And while some might argue that reducing the swinginess can make it a little less fun in-game, I, for one, really appreciate the reliability and the consistency. Couple that consistency in damage here with the ability that we have to use most of our spell slots for all of the control, utility, even support and defense and AoE burst that spells are so good at, and I think you've got an incredibly well-rounded and powerful build here. So I hope you enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun making it, and I love you guys. You're awesome. Thank you for all that you do for me, for the channel. I truly, truly appreciate it. I hope you have a great day and a great week. And if you don't, I hope you know that the potential for great days and weeks to come is very high. So don't give up. I hope that you'll do good and be kind, and that you'll stay safe, and that I see you again very soon. But until then, take care. Bye. I can't believe you. You bend your words like Uri Geller's spoons. It's not quite safe here, and every judgment seems to smack of doom. And are you okay? I'm just fine. Boom. You take Nancy, for me Loretta's fine. Oh, Toad the Wet Sprocket. I love that band so much. I think I've seen them in concert more than any other band ever. What's the band you've seen in concert the most? I think I've seen them 6 or 7 times, maybe. And they're really great guys too. Like when you meet them in person, just cool dudes. All right. Oh wait. Gotta get the mic right. Come on, microphone. Trying to match the color, the backlight with my shirt, but nothing that does as many options as I get with that light. They all kind of look too bright. I guess it's hard to do like a dark color in a light. It's sort of an aqua. Anyways, I did my best. It's called the Archmage or whatever. Archmage. Well, it could be off. You're focusing on the dragon again, camera. Oh, you and that dragon. Having a love affair with my dragon lamp. I would bonus action to get innate sorcery going. Oh, shoot. No, I'm not going to do that. Recrunch numbers. So...